Hello everyone, and welcome to another cartography lecture video. And in this lecture video, I want to discuss one more element of labeling, and that's this idea of halos and shadows to improve contrast. Halos and shadows. Now, if you're already familiar with these, that's great, but hopefully this will be a review. But just in case you're not, I want to talk about what each one of these is, what they do to the text, and then why we would use one over the other and what types of situations we would use them in general. So the first thing I want to talk about is actually shadows. So what a shadow does is it actually creates a duplicate copy of the text at an offset. So what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try and draw text in white. I'm going to draw a big letter S here. I'm going to draw a shadow in gray. So what I mean when it says it duplicates the text at an offset is that we're going to draw the exact same letter S, but we're going to be slightly off the line work. It's going to look something like this. All right, so you can see that this distance here, change colors. Right, the distance between here and here and here and here, right, those are our offsets in the X and Y direction. Now my little stick figure here doesn't do it justice, but both halos and shadows can really improve the contrast. Let me make a note of that here. Right, shadows and halos improve contrast. Right, they improve contrast when you need to improve contrast. And I'm going to show you some examples here in just a second to illustrate the need of shadows and halos and why you would use one over the other. So again, shadows basically create an exact copy of the text that's just slightly offset so that it almost creates like when you stand out on a sunny day and the sun helps you cast a shadow. That's exactly what we're doing here. We're shadowing the letter. So that's shadows. Creates a duplicate copy at an offset. Halos rather create a duplicate copy that is a thicker stroke width. Right, if you remember back to our discussion on fonts, right, stroke width is the width of the lettering. And so I'm going to scroll down a little bit and I'm going to do the same thing here to show you what that looks like. So if we draw our same letter S here, what a halo would do is a halo would look something like this when it was done. Now it's kind of hard to tell, but basically haloing is going to be attached to the letter versus shadowing is going to be offset from the letter. Halos are going to be wrapped all around on all sides. Shadow is only going to be on one side. So again, the key difference between a halo and a shadow is that a shadow is going to be on one side of the text and a halo is going to be on all sides of the text. Okay? Make a note of that. Shadows are on one side of the text. Halos are on all sides. Of the text. Okay. So hopefully that makes sense. Again, shadows are just an offset. Halos are basically surrounding the text with color. So let's take a look at some examples of when you would want to use these concepts of shadows and halos to increase contrast. Okay. So we have two examples. Both of these have a contrast issue. This one, we have a contrast issue just because of the fact that the color of the background that we've chosen and the color of the label text don't have a lot of contrast, right? We have this sort of pale green with white labeling, and maybe this was chosen for a reason. Maybe you wanted the white labels because of something and you wanted that pale green because of something. But now you have to deal with the contrast issue that you've created for yourself. So this is normal. Here you can see that we have color going around all parts of the letters. So this would be halo. And here you can see that we only have it going along one side of the letters. This is going to be your shadow. So, which one of these is better in this situation? I would actually argue that shadow is the way to go with this situation because shadow elevates the text. It's legible, right? It deals with that issue of contrast, but it doesn't elevate it so much to the fact that it might dominate the visual hierarchy, such as a halo would here. Okay. Let's look at another situation where you might want to use halos and shadows. And that's when you have an issue of intersection with another feature. And remember when we talked about placement that we actually said that one thing you want to avoid is having labels intersect features. In addition to it just making it hard to understand what features are where, you also can have issues like this where it actually makes the label harder to read as well. So this is another case where we have to deal with the fact that we have this label here that we can't read. So what do? This is normal. Again, we have the color going all the way around the letter. This is halo. And again, we have the color just on one side of the letter. This is shadow. So in this case, which one of these does a better job? Well, in this case, I would argue halo because you're breaking that line on all sides. So you're actually really elevating it above the conflict point. Versus here, you're only really elevating it a little bit on one side above the conflict point. So this is going to be much more readable than this is going to be. Okay? So let's summarize what we learned in these two examples. What we learned is this. If you are trying to improve contrast, use shadow. If you are dealing with collision and overlap, use halo. Now, one final piece of advice when it comes to shadows and halos is actually don't use them. More specifically, I should say use them sparingly. Right, because we can see just in these very small, simplistic examples, just how much, especially halo, elevates that label in the sort of visual hierarchy of the little mini map that we've made for ourselves here. And again, with cartography, right, you want the main element and the data to be the key point of the map. you don't necessarily want your labels to be that high in the visual hierarchy, especially if you're not having issues with contrast or collision. There's simply no need to use them. So don't just constantly be using these things because you think they look cool, right? You will either make your map harder to read because you might accidentally lower the contrast by making the letters more illegible, or you might elevate the font to a higher place in the visual hierarchy than you actually intend to. So hopefully this makes sense. And as always, if you have any questions, please reach out. Thank you.